I never thought I'd be that kind of woman. The kind who sneaks around, who lies to her husband, who checks her phone 100 times a day waiting for secret messages. But here I am, sitting in my car outside Randy's diner an hour before my shift starts, trying to delete evidence of last night's texts before Mike sees them. Mike. My husband of 7 years, who's probably elbow deep in an engine right now at Wilson's garage, completely unaware that his wife is having an affair with one of his customers. The guilt burns in my stomach, but not enough to make me stop. It started innocently enough. James Wilson became a regular at Randy's about 6 months ago, always sitting in my section during his lunch break from the factory. He'd ordered the same thing, turkey club, no mayo, extra pickles, and we'd chat while I refilled his coffee. Simple, harmless conversations about nothing important, until they weren't simple anymore. I remember the exact day things changed. It was raining, one of those dreary October afternoons when the diner was nearly empty. James stayed later than usual, nursing his coffee while I wiped down tables. "How long have you been married, Sarah?" he asked, watching me work. 7 years next month, I replied, not looking up from the sticky tabletop I was cleaning. Happy? The question made me pause. Was I happy? Mike and I lived in a small rental house, barely making ends meet between his mechanic's salary and my waitressing tips. We'd given up on having kids after 3 years of trying. Couldn't afford the fertility treatments anyway. Our lives had fallen into a routine of work, TV dinners, and separate schedules. "It's complicated," I finally answered, and James nodded like he understood completely. "Linda and I haven't shared a real conversation in 2 years," he confessed. "Sometimes I wonder if we're just going through the motions. I should have walked away then. Should have kept things professional. Instead, I sat down across from him, and we talked until Randy started giving me pointed looks about getting back to work. That night, I got my first text from James. "Thank you for listening today." 4 simple words that would change everything. The texts became regular after that. Nothing explicit at first, just little messages throughout the day. He'd tell me about difficult meetings at the factory. I'd complain about rude customers. We shared jokes, music recommendations, fragments of our lives that we weren't sharing with our spouses anymore. Mike never noticed my increased attachment to my phone. He was working longer hours at the garage, trying to save up for the down payment on a house we both knew we couldn't afford. Most nights, he'd come home smelling of motor oil and fall asleep on the couch watching car restoration shows. The first time James kissed me was behind the diner, 3 months after our rain day conversation. I was taking out the trash after my shift, and he was waiting by the dumpster. "I shouldn't be here," he said, but made no move to leave. "No, you shouldn't," I agreed. But I didn't walk away either. When his lips met mine, it felt like waking up from a long sleep. The kiss was desperate, hungry. Everything my life had been missing. We broke apart at the sound of a car door slamming in the parking lot, both breathing hard. "I can't stop thinking about you," he whispered against my hair. "This is wrong," I said, even as my hands clutched his jacket. "We're both married. To the wrong people." That night, I lay awake beside Mike, watching him sleep. He looked younger in the darkness, more like the boy who'd asked me to dance at my cousin's wedding 9 years ago. Back then, his easy smile and quiet confidence had seemed like everything I wanted. When had that changed? The affair properly started 2 weeks later. I told Mike I was picking up extra shifts at the diner, but instead, I was meeting James in a small motel just outside of town. Room 114 became our secret world, a place where we could pretend our other lives didn't exist. James was different from Mike in every way. Where Mike was practical and straightforward, James was passionate and complicated. He'd bring me books of poetry, tell me about his dreams of traveling the world. In that motel room, I wasn't just a small-town waitress. I was everything he saw in me. "You're wasted here," he'd say, tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. "You could be so much more than this." But reality had a way of seeping in, even through the thin motel walls. One afternoon, as I was getting dressed, my wedding ring caught on my blouse button. The sight of it made me pause. "Do you ever feel guilty?" I asked James, who was still lying in bed. He was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I think about how unhappy I was before you, and the guilt seems worth it." I wanted to believe him, but the guilt followed me home like a stray dog. It was there when I kissed Mike goodnight, when I sat across from him at breakfast, when I overheard him telling his mother on the phone that he was working extra hours to surprise me with a vacation for our anniversary. Karen, my closest friend at the diner, noticed the change in me first. "You're different lately," she said one morning as we set up for the breakfast rush. "Happier maybe, but nervous too." "Just tired," I lied, avoiding her eyes. "Been picking up lots of extra shifts." She gave me a long look. "Funny, Randy says you haven't been working any more hours than usual." My hands froze on the salt shaker I was filling. Must have misunderstood him. "Sarah," her voice was gentle, "whatever you're doing, be careful. Small towns have big mouths." She was right about that. Our town was the kind where everyone knew everyone else's business. Mike's garage was just 3 blocks from the factory where James worked. They saw each other regularly. James would bring his car in for service, and they'd chat about sports or the weather, while I died a little inside, imagining them discovering the truth. The closest call came in March. Mike was working late again, and James had texted asking me to meet him at our usual place. But when I pulled into the motel parking lot, I saw Linda's red Volkswagen parked near the office. My heart nearly stopped. Had she followed James? Did she know? I backed out of the lot so fast I nearly hit a garbage can. Later, James explained that Linda had been there for a parent-teacher conference at the elementary school across the street. Just a coincidence, but it shook me. "Maybe we should stop," I suggested that night on the phone, hiding in our bathroom with the shower running to mask my voice. "Do you want to stop?" James asked. No, I didn't. That was the problem. Despite the guilt, despite the risk, despite knowing what it would do to Mike if he ever found out, I couldn't imagine going back to my life before James. The next day at the diner, I overheard 2 regulars talking about Linda Wilson. Apparently, she'd started taking anxiety medication. "Poor thing," they said. "She knows something's wrong in her marriage but can't figure out what." The shame hit me like a physical blow. I rushed to the bathroom and threw up my breakfast, then sat on the cold tile floor and cried. What kind of person was I becoming? By May, our affair had settled into a dangerous routine. Tuesday and Thursday afternoons at the motel. Quick kisses behind the diner when James came for lunch. Endless text messages that I had to remember to delete. The excitement of sneaking around had faded, replaced by a constant anxiety that gnawed at my insides. One Tuesday afternoon, lying in our usual room at the motel, James started talking about leaving, really leaving, not just our spouses but the whole town. "I've got a friend in Colorado," he said, running his fingers through my hair. "Says his company's always hiring. We could start fresh there, just you and me." The idea was both thrilling and terrifying. What about Mike? Linda? They'd survive, maybe even be better off in the long run. He propped himself up on one elbow, looking at me intently. "Are you happy with him, Sarah? Really happy?" I thought about Mike, about our little rental house with its peeling wallpaper and creaky floors, about the way he still left his work boots by the front door, even though I'd asked him 1,000 times to put them in the mudroom, about how he'd stopped asking me about my day, stopped trying to make me laugh, stopped seeing me as anything more than a familiar piece of furniture in his life. "No," I whispered. "I'm not happy." "Then let's go, next month. I'll have enough saved by then." I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. Instead, I got dressed and drove home, my mind racing with possibilities. Could I really leave everything behind? Start a new life with James? That evening, Mike came home earlier than usual. He was excited about something, practically bouncing as he washed up for dinner. "Remember that Mustang that came in last month?" he asked, accepting the plate of spaghetti I handed him. "Owner's so happy with the work I did, he's recommended me to all his car collector friends. Wilson's giving me a raise in my own bay at the garage." He looked so proud, so hopeful. For the first time in months, he really looked at me, his eyes bright with excitement. "Things are going to get better, Sarah. I promise. No more late nights, no more scraping by." I forced a smile and congratulated him, but inside I felt hollow. How could I tell him that better wasn't enough anymore? That while he'd been working himself to exhaustion trying to build us a better life, I'd been destroying everything in secret? The next day at the diner, everything fell apart. Linda Wilson came in during the morning rush. She never came to Randy's, she preferred the fancy coffee shop downtown. But there she was, sliding into a booth in my section, her face pale and determined. "Coffee, please," she said when I approached. "And a few minutes of your time." My hands shook as I poured her coffee. "I'm working. I know about you and James." The coffee pot nearly slipped from my grip. Linda's eyes were red-rimmed but steady. "How?" I managed to ask. "Found the motel receipts. Followed him last week. Saw you together." Each sentence was like a bullet. I thought about telling Mike. He's a good man, you know. Talks about you all the time at the garage, how proud he is of how hard you work. I sank into the booth across from her, my legs unable to hold me up any longer. Linda, save it, she cut me off. I'm not here for apologies. I'm here to tell you that James has done this before. 3 years ago, with his secretary. A year before that, with our neighbor. Each time he promised to leave me, to start a new life somewhere else. He never does. Linda's words hit me like ice water. You're lying, I whispered, but even as I said it, doubt crept in. How many times had James been vague about his past? How many stories had slightly different details each time he told them? Check his phone, Linda said, standing up. Look for messages from Rebecca or Claire. They're still there, he keeps them like trophies. She dropped a 20 on the table. Keep the change, consider it payment for the wake-up call. She left me sitting there, my world crumbling around me. Karen covered my section while I locked myself in the employee bathroom, hands shaking as I pulled out my phone. James had texted 3 times already that morning. Miss you. Thinking about Colorado. Can't wait to start our new life. The words that had once made my heart race now made me feel sick. I thought about Mike, about his raise, about how hard he'd been working to give us a better life. And what had I been doing? Throwing it all away for pretty lies in a cheap motel room? That afternoon, instead of meeting James at the motel, I went to the factory where he worked. The receptionist knew me. She was a regular at the diner. Is Mrs. Wilson still working here? I asked casually. Rebecca? The receptionist looked confused. No, she left about 3 years ago. Such a mess, that whole situation. My stomach lurched. Linda had been telling the truth. I waited in the parking lot until James came out. When he saw me, his face lit up, then quickly turned concerned when he noticed my expression. Sarah, what's wrong? Tell me about Rebecca, I said flatly. The color drained from his face. Who told you about her? Does it matter? Was Linda telling the truth? About Rebecca, about Claire? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I'd once found endearing. Now it just looked nervous, guilty. It's complicated. No, I cut him off. It's actually very simple. You're a liar. Sarah, please, what we have is different. I really do want to leave with you. Like you wanted to leave with them? He reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I love you, he said desperately. No, you love the chase. The excitement, the power of making someone choose you over their life. The clarity was painful but liberating. Well, I'm not choosing you. I drove home in a daze, pulled into our driveway, and sat there for a long time, watching the sun set through our kitchen window. I could see Mike moving around inside, probably making dinner. He was terrible at cooking, but he'd been trying more since I'd been working late so often. The weight of what I'd done, what I'd almost thrown away, crashed over me. I'd been so caught up in the excitement of James's attention, in the fantasy of being someone else, that I'd nearly destroyed the one person who had always been real with me. Walking into our house felt like walking into a stranger's home. The familiar smells of Mike's attempted cooking, something was definitely burning. The sound of the TV playing one of his car shows, the pile of his work boots by the door, it all felt both foreign and achingly familiar. Hey, Mike called from the kitchen. I'm trying that pasta thing you like, though I think the sauce isn't supposed to be this chunky. I stood in the doorway of our kitchen, watching Mike frown at a pot of what was supposed to be marinara sauce. He had a smudge of tomato on his cheek, and his kiss the cook apron, a joke gift from his mother, was covered in spots. I think I messed up, he admitted, looking up at me with that boyish grin that had first made me fall for him. Pizza? Something in me broke. The tears came without warning, heavy sobs that made my whole body shake. Mike was across the kitchen in seconds, wrapping his arms around me. Hey, it's not that bad, he joked, but his voice was worried. I'll learn to cook eventually, I promise. I couldn't stop crying. All the guilt, the shame, the realization of what I'd almost thrown away, it poured out of me in waves. Mike just held me, stroking my hair, waiting for me to calm down. Sarah, he finally said softly, what's really wrong? I knew I had to tell him. The thought of continuing to lie, of carrying this secret between us, was unbearable, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you tell someone you love that you've betrayed them in the worst possible way? I need to tell you something, I managed between sobs. And it's going to hurt you, and you might hate me, and you have every right to, but I can't. I can't keep lying. Mike led me to our small kitchen table, sat me down, and waited. His face was serious now, worried. I could see him bracing himself for bad news, but I knew he couldn't possibly be prepared for what I was about to say. I've been having an affair, I whispered. With James Wilson. The silence that followed was deafening. Mike sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the table, staring at a point somewhere over my shoulder. I could see him processing, see the moment understanding hit him like a physical blow. How long? His voice was barely audible. 6 months. He flinched like I'd slapped him. 6 months? It's over, I said quickly. Today. I ended it. Linda told me. She told me I wasn't the first. That he's done this before. I was so stupid, Mike. So incredibly stupid. Mike stood up abruptly, knocking his chair over. He paced our small kitchen, running his hands through his hair, breathing heavily. I waited for the explosion, for the anger I deserved. Instead, he asked, why? It was the hardest question he could have asked. Because. Because I felt invisible. Because he made me feel special, important. Because I was selfish and weak and... God, Mike, I don't know. None of it makes sense now. Did I? His voice cracked. Did I do something wrong? That broke me all over again. No, I sobbed. No, you did everything right. You worked so hard for us, you tried so hard to make things better. I'm the one who ruined everything. He walked to the window, staring out at our small backyard. I need some time to think. Are you going to leave? Mike turned back to me, his eyes red. I don't know. I honestly don't know what I'm going to do. He grabbed his keys and jacket, paused at the door. Don't wait up, he said, then left. I heard his truck start up, heard the gravel crunch under the tires as he pulled away. I spent that night on our couch, staring at my phone. James had texted dozens of times, but I didn't read the messages. Instead, I scrolled through old photos of Mike and me, at his cousin's wedding, at the beach last summer. Random silly selfies from happier times. When had we stopped taking pictures together? When had we stopped making memories? Mike came home just before dawn. He smelled like the old fishing pier, his thinking spot since high school. His eyes were bloodshot but clear. We need rules, he said, sitting in his armchair across from me. If we're going to try to fix this, and I'm not saying we can, but if we try, we need rules. I nodded, hardly daring to breathe. First, you quit the diner. I know we need the money, but you can't work there anymore. Okay. Second, complete honesty, about everything. No more deleted texts, no more secret meetings, no more lies about where you are or what you're doing. Yes. Third, counseling, both of us, together and separately. Something broke here, Sarah, and I don't just mean what you did. We broke somewhere along the way, and if we're going to fix it, we need help. I agreed to everything. He could have asked me to walk across hot coals, and I would have done it. I can't promise I'll get past this, he added softly. I want to, but I don't know if I can. But I'm willing to try. It's been 6 months since that night. We're still in counseling, still working through the damage I caused. Some days are better than others. Some days Mike can barely look at me. And I know he's thinking about James, about those 6 months of betrayal. Other days, we catch glimpses of who we used to be. I got a job at the library 2 towns over. The pay isn't as good as the diner, but it's worth it to be away from the memories, from the possibility of running into James. I heard through Karen that he and Linda are getting divorced. Apparently, I wasn't the only secret he was keeping this time. Mike and I are taking things day by day. We've started having dinner together every night, really talking like we used to. Last week, he took me to the pier where he went that night, and we watched the sunrise together. He held my hand, and for a moment, I felt hope. I know now that love isn't about grand gestures or passionate declarations. It's not about poetry or promises of new lives in distant places. Real love is in the small moments, in burned pasta sauce and work boots by the door. It's in the choice to stay, to fight, to rebuild even when walking away would be easier. I don't know if Mike and I will make it. I don't know if he'll ever fully trust me again, or if I deserve that trust. But I do know that I'm done looking for excitement in lies. I'm done pretending to be someone I'm not. I'm Sarah Matthews, the mechanic's wife. And this time, I choose to stay.